The rain fell over Seattle in a relentless curtain of silver, turning the streets into rivers and the city lights into trembling reflections. The air smelled of wet asphalt and forgotten promises. On Capitol Hill, where laughter from bars collided with the hum of passing cars, a young woman ran through the rain, as if chased by the night itself. Ava Thompson clutched her small bag against her chest, her breath uneven, her hair plastered to her face. Behind her, a man's voice shouted her name, angry and slurred, the kind of voice that once sounded familiar, but now only meant danger. She turned into a narrow alley, her steps splashing through puddles, until her heel caught in the metal grate. Pain shot through her ankle as she felt her palms scraping against the cold pavement. The rain seemed louder now, as though the whole city was holding its breath. Ava pulled at her foot, panic tightening her throat. It would not move. She tried again, her fingers slipping on the wet iron. The echo of approaching footsteps sent a new wave of fear through her. She pulled harder, twisting, until tears mixed with the rain on her face. Then through the downpour came the low growl of an engine. Headlights flooded the alley with light. A sleek black car slowed and stopped a few feet away. The driver's door opened and a tall figure stepped into the rain. Ava froze, unable to tell if it was the same man or another threat. Her voice came out as a trembling whisper. "Please, don't hurt me. I can't go." Liam Hart closed the car door softly behind him. The rain struck his shoulders and rolled down his coat, but he did not move back. He had been driving aimlessly for an hour, thinking about the decisions that had built his empire and destroyed his peace. Now in front of him, a young woman crouched in the rain, her eyes wide, her body tense. She looked like a frightened bird that had forgotten how to fly. "It's okay," he said, voice steady and calm. "You're safe." Ava shook her head, still tugging at her trapped foot. "Just go. Please, just go." Liam crouched down, keeping his movements slow. "Your shoe's caught," he said. "If you stop pulling, I can help you." She hesitated. In the white glare of the headlights, she saw the lines of his face, the way his eyes didn't wander, didn't threaten. There was something quiet in him, something she couldn't name. After a long second, she nodded. He gripped the edge of the grate, forcing it open, just enough for her to free her foot. She gasped as she pulled back, the pain from her ankle making her wince. When she tried to stand, she faltered, and he caught her by the elbow. "Easy," he said. "Don't put weight on it yet." Ava stiffened under his touch, ready to retreat, but his hand dropped the moment she found her balance. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice raw. "I'm fine now, you're not," he replied. "That ankle looks bad." He took off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. She tried to refuse, but the warmth made her realize how cold she was. "You should see a doctor," he added. "There's a clinic close by." "I can't afford that," she murmured. "And I don't know you." "Then don't think of it as trust," he said quietly. "Think of it as practicality. You need help, and I happen to be here." Something about his tone, measured, distant, yet sincere, disarmed her. When he gestured toward the car, she limped beside him, each step echoing through the narrow alley. Inside, the leather seats were warm, and the silence between them was louder than the rain outside. He did not ask questions, did not pry. "What's your name?" he asked after a minute. "Ava," she said, staring at the raindrops chasing each other down the window. "Ava Thompson." "I'm Liam," he replied. Though the name meant nothing to her yet. "I promise I'm just taking you to the clinic." She nodded, exhausted. the car moved smoothly through the wet streets. Outside, the neon lights of the city flickered through the mist. Ava's eyelids grew heavy. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving only the tremor of relief. When they arrived at the clinic, he parked and turned toward her. "Stay put," he said. "I'll get someone." Before she could stop him, he was out in the rain again. She watched through the windshield as he spoke to a nurse at the entrance, then returned with an umbrella. "Can you walk?" he asked. She tried, but grimaced in pain. Without waiting for her pride to argue, he offered his arm. This time she accepted. Together they crossed the sidewalk, the umbrella shielding them from the downpour. Inside, the fluorescent light felt too bright. The nurse led Ava to a room while Liam filled out a form at the counter. He signed it simply as L. Hart. When she noticed he had paid, she tried to protest. He stopped her with a small shake of his head. "It's nothing," he said. "Just take care of yourself." Before she could ask more, he was already walking away. She caught a glimpse of him through the glass door, his back straight, his steps unhurried, vanishing into the curtain of rain. Later, after her ankle was wrapped and the pain dulled by medication, Ava sat alone in the waiting room. The clinic was nearly empty now, the rain still whispering outside. On the seat beside her lay a folded note she hadn't seen before. She opened it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was elegant and firm. "You are safe now. Rest. L." She pressed the paper against her chest, feeling the strange warmth of gratitude mix with confusion. No one had looked at her without judgment for a long time. No one had stopped. Outside the window, the city shimmered beneath the rain, endless and alive. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the sound of his voice. "You're safe." It echoed in her head softer each time until she almost believed it. Somewhere across the city, Liam drove through the wet streets, his wipers beating a steady rhythm. He could still see her face when he closed his eyes. The fear, the strength beneath it, the way she had whispered "please," like it was a prayer. He told himself it was nothing, just a moment, an accident of circumstance. Yet when he reached his building and looked at the towering glass structure of Hartwell Dynamics, glowing in the distance, he felt an emptiness that no amount of success could quiet. He sat for a long time and let the engine hum in the background. For years he had measured life in profit margins and data in equations of efficiency and control. But that night in a rain-soaked alley, a trembling voice had reminded him of something he had almost forgotten, that compassion was not a calculation. It was a choice. As he stepped out of the car, the rain caught him again, soaking his shirt, cooling the fever of his thoughts. He looked up at the sky and let it fall on his face, as if the city itself was trying to cleanse him of all that he had built to keep himself from feeling. Somewhere out there, a girl he barely knew was finding the strength to stand again. And for the first time in years, Liam Hart allowed himself to hope that maybe so could he. The morning broke gray and gentle over Seattle, the kind of light that carried more silence than warmth. Ava woke to the faint antiseptic scent of the small clinic room, the bandage tight around her ankle. The world outside the window was still dripping from the night storm. For a moment, she thought she had dreamed it all, the car, the man, the voice. But when she turned her head, a folded note lay on the table beside her bed. The same neat handwriting stared back at her. "You are safe now. Rest. L." She read it again and again, her fingers tracing the ink, as though it could reveal more about the man who had written it. L. Who was he? Why had he helped her without wanting anything in return? In her life, kindness usually came with a cost. When the nurse came in to check her bandage, Ava asked about the man who had brought her in, but the nurse only smiled and said he had paid the bill in full and left before sunrise. He didn't even give his full name, she said you'd find your own way. Ava looked down at the note again and nodded softly. Yeah, she murmured, I guess I will. She limped home under the drizzle, the borrowed umbrella trembling in her hand, her mind replaying his calm voice in the chaos. The city felt different now, less cruel, more alive, as though one act of mercy had rearranged its rhythm. By afternoon, she was back at the small cafe on Pine Street, where she worked part-time, moving carefully behind the counter. Her coworker Nora raised an eyebrow when she saw the bandage. You fall again? She teased, pouring coffee for a customer. Something like that, Ava said, forcing a smile. She didn't mention the stranger, though she caught herself glancing at every man who walked through the door. By late evening, the rain started again, softer this time, as though rehearsing its own apology. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and when she looked up, she almost dropped the mug in her hand. The man from last night stood in the doorway shaking the rain from his coat. For a heartbeat, everything around her blurred. He noticed her stare, smiled faintly, and said, Looks like we keep meeting in the rain. The same calm tone, but now she heard something else behind it. Curiosity, maybe even relief. You, she breathed, then caught herself. Hi, coffee. If you're serving, he said, sliding into a corner booth. Black, no sugar. She brought him the cup, still unsure if she should thank him or pretend the night before never happened. He seemed to sense her hesitation. How's the ankle? He asked, eyes flicking to the bandage. Sore, she admitted. But I can walk, thanks to you. He nodded, taking a sip. You don't owe me thanks. I think I do, she said quietly. Most people wouldn't have stopped. He looked down at the cup, the steam blurring his reflection. Someone once didn't stop for me, he said after a pause. I guess that changes you. She frowned, wanting to ask more, but the way he said it made her stay silent. Instead, she said, You left this, and held up the note. His eyes softened. I'm glad you read it. You didn't even leave a full name. Maybe because it wasn't about who I am, he said. It was about you being safe. Still, she said, her voice firming. I'd like to know who to thank properly. He hesitated, then reached into his wallet, pulling out a business card. When she read the embossed letters, her breath caught. Liam Hart, CEO Hartwell Dynamics. She had seen that name before on news articles, interviews, company billboards about artificial intelligence in healthcare. You're that Liam Hart, she said, disbelief coloring her tone. You run the company with the machines that read emotions. He nodded once, as if it were a minor detail. Used to, he said. Now they mostly run themselves. Why were you even in that alley, she asked. Seems a strange place for a billionaire to be. Maybe I was looking for something I lost, he said simply. She smiled despite herself. And you found me instead. Seems so. For the first time, his expression softened into something almost human, not the polished look of the man on magazine covers. There was a weariness in him that she recognized, the same exhaustion that came from pretending to have it together. They talked for a while, the kind of cautious conversation that hovered between politeness and honesty. He asked about her job, her art degree she had once pursued, before life collapsed, and the reason she had been running last night. She told him pieces of the truth, leaving out the man who had tried to drag her back into a past she wanted to forget. Liam did not press her. When he rose to leave, he left a $20 bill under the cup and said, "You'll heal fine, but maybe keep a flat pair of shoes on rainy nights." She laughed softly. "Good advice, Mr. Hart." "Liam," he corrected, "if we keep meeting like this, we might as well skip the titles." After he left, Nora came over, eyes wide. "You know who that was?" Apparently, Ava said, folding the bill, the faint smile still on her lips. "A man who doesn't like sugar in his coffee." That night, lying on her small couch, she replayed every word he had said, every glance that seemed to hold something she couldn't name. There was a loneliness in him, deep and quiet, like the part of the ocean no one ever touches. She wondered why a man, with the world at his feet, looked as though he carried a weight no one else could see. Across town in his glass-walled apartment overlooking Lake Union, Liam stood before the window, watching the lights ripple on the water. The city was quiet, yet his thoughts were loud. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted his approval, his money, his influence, but not his truth. And yet a woman he barely knew had looked at him not with awe or calculation, but with simple confusion and gratitude. He found himself wondering about her laughter, her small stubbornness, the way she had tried to hide pain behind pride. He thought of the words he had once told an interviewer, that empathy could be engineered. Tonight that felt like a lie. Compassion could not be coded or built. It had to be chosen. He picked up his phone, typed her name into a search bar, and stopped halfway. No, he told himself. Let it rest. But he did not delete the search. He placed the phone face down, exhaled, and for the first time in years allowed the quiet to stay. Meanwhile, back in her apartment, Ava held the note again under the lamplight. The ink shimmered faintly, the rain outside a lullaby against the glass. She whispered the letters to herself, a promise wrapped in mystery. L. She did not know it yet, but the man who had stepped out of the rain to help her would soon step into her life in ways neither of them could predict. For now it was enough that kindness had found her when she least expected it, and for the first time in a long while, she believed that maybe people could surprise her. The following week unfolded under a steady curtain of drizzle that blurred the line between days. Ava returned to work, her limp easing but still visible, and each shift she found herself glancing at the corner booth where he had sat. Sometimes she told herself she was being foolish, that a man like Liam Hart had no reason to come back to a cafe that smelled of burnt espresso and rain. Yet a part of her listened for the sound of the doorbell anyway. On Thursday evening, just as she began to close up, he appeared again, carrying the same unshakable calm as if the world outside bent to his pace. He ordered coffee without looking at the menu, and this time, when she brought it over, he said, "You shouldn't be on that ankle so soon." "You shouldn't be watching my ankle," she replied, before she could stop herself. He laughed quietly, the sound low and unpolished. "Fair point," he said. "But I notice things. It's a habit." She raised an eyebrow. "Because of your job, because of my mistakes," he said simply. The honesty disarmed her. She leaned against the counter, studying him. "You seem like someone who doesn't make many." "Then you'd be surprised," he answered, his gaze distant, the steam from his cup curling between them like a secret. Over the next weeks, he kept coming back, never at the same hour, sometimes alone, sometimes with a laptop open, but never typing. They talked about ordinary things, art, the weather, the way Seattle seemed to exist, in shades of gray, and beneath those small exchanges, something began to shift. Ava found herself smiling more easily, her guard lowering a little each day. He never asked personal questions, but when she spoke, he listened in a way that made her feel the world had paused just long enough to make space for her words. One night near closing time, the rain grew heavy again, slanting across the windows like moving glass. She sat across from him during her break sketchbook open. "You draw," he said, noticing the faint lines of pencil on the page. "Used to," she corrected. "I studied art for a while before life got in the way." "What happened?" She hesitated. "Tuition bills, a boyfriend who said painting wouldn't pay for rent." "And you listened for a while?" She turned the page, showing him a half-finished sketch of a woman standing under an umbrella. "Now I paint between shifts when I can afford the supplies." Liam looked at the drawing, the light catching the faint tremor in his expression. "You didn't lose your dream," he said softly. "You just postponed it." The words lingered in the space between them longer than they should have. Ava smiled, but didn't trust herself to reply. When she looked up again, he was staring at her as though he wanted to memorize the expression. Later that week, a storm knocked out power in half the city. The cafe closed early, but the street signs outside flickered like ghostly candles. Ava locked the doors and stepped out, only to find Liam waiting by the curb holding an umbrella. "You again," she said, half teasing, half relieved. "You walked home in this weather." "I was nearby," he said. "Old habits die hard." They walked together through the rain-soaked streets, her limp slowing them down. When they passed a mural of bright colors peeling under the damp, he stopped. "You know," he said, "my company once sponsored a charity that used art therapy for trauma survivors. It changed more lives than most of our machines." "Machines don't heal," she said quietly. "People do." He glanced at her, the rain dripping from his hair. "You might be right." They stopped at a small bodega to wait out the storm. The neon lights buzzed above them, painting their faces blue. She watched him as he shook water from his sleeves, noticing for the first time how tired he looked. Not the fatigue of work, but of years spent holding too much inside. "You always look like you're thinking 10 steps ahead," she said. "That's the curse of a planner," he replied. "The future keeps talking louder than the present." "Then maybe you need someone to turn down the volume." His eyes met hers. "Maybe I already found her." The words slipped out so quietly, she almost thought she imagined them. They stood there for a long moment, the sound of the rain and their breaths filling the silence. When the storm eased, they walked again, and near her building she stopped. "Thank you," she said, clutching her sketchbook, "for tonight." "You don't have to thank me," every time he said. "I told you I wasn't trying to save anyone." "Then what are you trying to do?" she asked. He looked at her as if searching for an answer he hadn't yet found. "Stay," he said finally. "I'm trying to stay." She nodded, not fully understanding, but feeling the weight of the word. The next day she Googled him, reading headlines about Hartwell Dynamics, about the brilliant but cold CEO who rarely gave interviews. She found photos of him at charity galas, always composed, always distant. Yet none of them looked like the man who had held an umbrella over her without saying a word. That evening when he returned, she had a question ready. "You've done a lot of good things," she said, showing him one of the articles. "But everyone keeps calling you the heartless genius." Why, he looked amused. "Because I don't give them what they expect." People mistake privacy for pride. Is it? Sometimes he admitted. Sometimes it's just self-preservation. He leaned back, watching her reaction. The world likes to turn compassion into weakness, Ava. You learn to hide it if you want to survive. She considered that, then said, maybe you don't have to hide it anymore. He smiled faintly. Maybe you're right. Outside, the rain returned softer this time. The cafe lights cast a warm glow over their table, and when she reached for his cup to refill it, their fingers brushed. It was a small touch, accidental, yet both froze for a heartbeat. She felt the warmth of his skin, the steadiness beneath it. He looked at her eyes, unreadable, but not indifferent. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single point of contact, a breath suspended between two lives heading in opposite directions. Then he pulled back, gently, clearing his throat. You're going to ruin your sketchbook if you keep leaving it open near the steam. She laughed nervously, closing it. Right, you'd think I'd learn. When she left that night, she found a business card tucked under her bag. No signature, no message, just his name embossed in silver. She slipped it into her coat pocket and smiled. At home, she placed it beside his note on the table. Under the lamplight, the two pieces of him, a single letter and a full name, sat side by side like beginnings of a story she wasn't ready to admit she wanted. Across town, Liam stood by the window of his office, the city lights glittering against the rain. His reflection looked back at him, the ghost of the man he used to be. He thought of her voice, the way she had said, maybe you don't have to hide it anymore. For the first time in years, he wondered if someone might actually see him without wanting to fix him. The storm outside faded to a whisper, and the man who had once built machines to understand emotion realized he was finally beginning to feel again. The rain finally broke that weekend, leaving the air crisp and the city polished as though someone had washed it clean. Ava sat at her usual table in the cafe, sketching quietly between customers, when Liam walked in, dressed more casually than usual. Dark sweater, no tie, the kind of look that made him seem less like a headline and more like a man who might actually belong to the world. He ordered tea instead of coffee, then looked toward her sketchbook. You're getting better, he said. That's what practice does, she replied, hiding a small smile. You ever think of showing your work to who the pigeons in Pioneer Square? He chuckled softly. To people who might need it. She frowned. Need it, art and mind, he said, sliding a small folder toward her. Inside was a proposal stamped with the Hartwell Dynamics logo. It's a program we're building, art therapy for trauma patients. We're partnering with clinics across the city. And you're telling me this because I think you should be part of it. She blinked, unsure if he was serious. Liam, I make lattes and doodle when the espresso machine's quiet. That's not all you do, he said. You see people, you understand pain without turning away from it. That's what this project needs. She hesitated, flipping through the folder. Her name, already printed on a potential team list, made her heart stumble. You're assuming I'll say yes. I'm hoping he said tone gentler now. It's your choice. That evening, she walked home with the folder, tucked under her arm, torn between disbelief and an unfamiliar pulse of hope. She spent hours reading every page, the words blurring into something bigger than herself. Healing connection renewal. By morning, she texted the number he had written on his card. I'll do it. Just don't expect miracles. His reply came minutes later. Miracles are overrated. Effort is enough. Weeks passed and the project took form inside an unused wing of a community center overlooking Lake Union. The space smelled of paint and sawdust. Ava worked with volunteers, setting up easels, laying out brushes, hanging white lights that made the walls glow like dawn. When Liam arrived to tour the space, he looked different, lighter somehow. "You did this," he said, stepping closer to examine the murals she had painted across the far wall, waves rising toward a burst of light. "You gave the place a heartbeat." "I just painted what I wanted to feel," she said. Maybe that's the same thing, he murmured. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. For a fleeting second, she thought he might reach out to touch her hand, but instead he turned, studying a framed photograph on a nearby table. It showed a woman with soft brown hair, laughing beside a young Liam at what looked like a science fair. The caption read, "In memory of Clara Hart, visionary and dreamer." Ava froze. "She was your wife," she said quietly. "She was," he confirmed. "Car accident 5 years ago." His voice was steady but carried the weight of an unfinished sentence. "She was driving to meet me after a late meeting. I was on a call trying to close a contract. She never made it." Ava looked down, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." "It's all right," he interrupted softly. "Most people pretend not to see the photo. You didn't." She studied the image again. "You built Hartwell Dynamics after she died, didn't you?" He nodded. Clara was a medical researcher. She believed we could teach machines to understand emotion, to predict breakdowns before they happened. I kept her dream alive, but somewhere along the way, I turned it into something colder. I built a company to heal others while avoiding my own wounds. You built machines to save others, she said. Did they save you? He looked at her, then the edges of his composure dissolving. No, he said quietly, but maybe you will. The air thickened between them, a fragile silence that neither broke. In his eyes she saw exhaustion and yearning and something tender that made her chest ache. Before she could respond, volunteers entered carrying boxes, and the moment shattered like glass. That night, Ava lay awake, replaying his words. Maybe you will? She told herself it was nothing more than gratitude, a line spoken in vulnerability, yet her heart refused to listen. The next day, the first art therapy session began. Patients trickled in, men and women with quiet eyes, children clutching sketch pads. Ava moved among them, helping mix colors, adjusting easels, her voice calm and encouraging. Liam observed from the corner, dressed simply, sleeves rolled, as if trying to blend in. When one child began to cry over a ruined drawing, Ava knelt beside her. You can start over, she said gently. Sometimes the second try is better because you already know what hurts. Later, Liam approached her. You were good with her, he said. I just spoke the truth. Still, he said, watching her, it mattered. As days turned into weeks, their connection deepened not through words, but through small, ordinary acts. The way he brought her coffee before class, the way she left sketches on his desk, with little notes like, don't forget to breathe. Yet outside their quiet world, the noise was beginning. A journalist spotted them at a charity event, laughing beside a painting the clinic had auctioned. By the next morning, a headline spread across the local news: Billionaire CEO and cafe girl, the curious case of Liam Hart's muse. The story twisted, the truth turning kindness into scandal. Reporters camped outside Hartwell headquarters. His assistant warned him that shareholders were restless, but Liam ignored the calls for comment. Instead, he went to the community center, where Ava sat alone, scrolling through the article on her phone. "They'll move on," he said, sitting beside her. "They always do." "It's my fault," she said. "If I hadn't stopped," he interrupted. "You did nothing wrong." "They think I'm using you," she said bitterly. "They don't know me, Liam." "Then let them talk," he said. "The truth doesn't need their permission." She looked at him, tears forming. "You're going to lose everything if you keep standing by me." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time I learned what's worth keeping." Outside, the rain began again, tapping softly on the windows like a heartbeat. Ava leaned back in her chair, staring at him, and for the first time, she realized how fragile he truly was beneath the control. The man who built machines to measure human emotion was finally beginning to feel his own. She reached across the table, her hand brushing his. Not out of romance, but understanding. His fingers tightened slightly around hers. Neither of them speaking, both knowing that something irreversible had begun. The headlines multiplied overnight like sparks catching wind. By morning, every business blog and gossip feed in Seattle had plastered their photos side by side. Liam Hart, the elusive billionaire, and Ava Thompson, the cafe waitress turned art therapist. The captions ranged from curious to cruel. "The heartless genius finds his heart." One read while another sneered, "Billionaire's charity project becomes personal affair." Ava stared at the screen in disbelief as her phone buzzed nonstop. Journalists called pretending to be donors. Old acquaintances messaged for details, and her boss at the cafe left a voicemail asking her not to come in until things settled. Her stomach twisted. She had never been the center of attention before, and now it felt like the whole city was pointing. At the same time, across the glass tower of Hartwell Dynamics, Liam stood before a line of executives, their polished shoes tapping impatiently. His head of communications spoke first. "This story is spreading fast. They're questioning whether the Art and Mind program is a cover for personal involvement." Another added, "The board is demanding an internal review. Investors want reassurance that your relationship won't affect partnerships." Liam listened without blinking, then said quietly, "There is no relationship." "That's not how it looks," one of them replied. He met their eyes, the calm in his tone, slicing through the room. Then maybe people should learn to stop mistaking decency for scandal. But as the day went on, the noise grew louder. A TV segment aired footage of him and Ava walking in the rain outside the community center, slowed down as if it were a confession. By afternoon, Ava's apartment was surrounded by reporters. She drew her curtains trembling as camera flashes burst through the window cracks. She called Liam once, then hung up before he could answer. She didn't want to sound like a problem he needed to solve. When the doorbell rang an hour later, her heart raced, but it was him. He stood soaked from the rain, hair clinging to his forehead, eyes tired but steady. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "They'll see you. Let them," he replied, stepping inside. "You're not alone in this. You can't fix this," she said, voice shaking. "I'm not trying to fix it," he said softly. "I'm trying to make sure you're okay." Her breath caught the calm in his words, pulling her back from panic. "I can't breathe when they're out there," she whispered. He guided her to the couch, kneeling in front of her. "Close your eyes," he said. "Focus on my voice." She obeyed, and he spoke quietly, the rhythm of his tone anchoring her. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. You're safe." She did as he said, her breathing easing, her pulse slowing. When she opened her eyes again, He was still there, rainwater dripping onto the carpet, his hand resting near hers, but not touching. "You're allowed to be scared," he murmured. "Just don't let fear decide who you are." She wanted to tell him how much those words meant, but emotion tightened her throat. Instead, she nodded. He smiled faintly and stood scanning the mess of unanswered messages on her table. "You need to rest. I'll have someone from the foundation handle the press." "You don't have to protect me," she said. "I'm not protecting you," he said, meeting her eyes. "I'm standing with you." She felt tears rise, but before she could speak, his phone vibrated. He answered, listening silently, then ended the call. His expression shifted, the quiet weight of decision forming behind his calm. "The board's holding an emergency meeting," he said. "They're asking for my resignation." Ava's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because of me, because they need a story that makes sense?" he replied. "It's easier than facing what's broken inside their own system." She stood limping slightly. "Then tell them the truth, that I care about someone more than my image." He smiled without humor. "That's not the kind of truth corporations reward." She reached for him, but he stepped back, shaking his head gently. "Don't. If they think this costs me nothing, maybe they'll stop coming after you." "Liam, Ava," he interrupted softly. "It's okay. This isn't your fault." The next morning, every news outlet in the city broadcast the same announcement: Liam Hart steps down as CEO of Hartwell Dynamics following ethics controversy. His statement was brief: "Innovation is meaningless without humanity. My choice is to keep the latter intact." The press called it a fall from grace. Employees whispered about the woman who had undone him. Ava couldn't bear to read any of it. She stayed inside, lights off, trying not to imagine the look on his face when he left the boardroom. Late that evening, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find a young woman holding an envelope. "Mr. Hart asked me to deliver this," she said. Inside was a short note in his familiar handwriting. "Do not let them make you small. You reminded me what purpose feels like." "Thank you for that." She pressed the paper to her chest, her tears finally breaking free. Across town, Liam sat alone in his apartment, the skyline a blur beyond the glass. He had traded his empire for silence, and though part of him felt stripped bare, another part finally felt clean. He turned on the news just long enough to hear a panel debating his decision, then switched it off. He poured a glass of water and sat on the floor beside the window, his thoughts circling Ava, the way she had faced him with anger and fear, and still found the strength to help others. Losing his title felt less like failure and more like truth. He thought of Clara, his late wife, and how she had once said compassion was the only currency that never lost value. He smiled faintly, realizing he was finally living by the words he used to quote. The rain returned gentle this time, tracing silver lines down the glass. Somewhere across the city, Ava fell asleep, clutching his note, dreaming not of headlines or mistakes, but of the man who had taught her that mercy could feel like strength. And though neither of them knew what would come next, they both understood that a single act of kindness could start a fire no storm could ever put out. The days after Liam's resignation passed like a muted storm, the kind that didn't destroy, but hollowed out everything it touched. The city moved on quickly, as cities always do, but for Ava, every headline still felt personal. She tried to lose herself in work at the Art and Mind Center, painting walls, rearranging supplies, avoiding questions. People came and went with kind smiles and quiet curiosity, their eyes saying what they didn't dare. You were the reason he left. At night she reread his note until the ink seemed to fade under her touch. Gratitude warred with guilt until both feelings became one heavy ache. Then one afternoon, while sorting donation files in the back office, she found the grant ledger from a year ago, tucked between two folders. The name printed on the page froze her breath. Northview Wellness Group, subsidiary of Hartwell Dynamics, terminated under restructuring order signed by L. Hart. Underneath it was a list of employees laid off when the program shut down. One name stopped her heart: Evelyn Thompson, her mother. She sank into the chair, the paper trembling in her hands. Her mother had worked at that rehabilitation clinic for 15 years, before being dismissed during the layoffs that ruined her health insurance and forced her to take early retirement. Ava remembered those nights vividly. Her mother coughing bills piling up, saying they called it restructuring. But what they meant was disposable. She had never known who signed the decision. Until now, Liam Hart, the man who had saved her in an alley. The man she had trusted. The man she had started to believe in. She read the signature again, her stomach twisting. It couldn't be real. Maybe it was coincidence, a different division, a bureaucratic oversight. But deep down she knew better. The precision of his name left no doubt. Hours later, she waited outside his apartment building, the folded page burning in her pocket. The sky hung low and gray, threatening another storm. When the elevator doors opened and he stepped out into the lobby, he looked startled but not surprised to see her. "Ava," he said, voice careful. "What are you doing here? I need to ask you something," she said, forcing calm into her tone. "And I want the truth." He nodded slowly. "All right." She handed him the paper. "Did you sign this?" He looked down at it, recognition flickering across his face. "Yes," he said after a pause. "It was part of the corporate restructuring that year." "Why you laid off my mother?" she said, her voice breaking on the word. He froze. "Your mother, Evelyn Thompson," she said. "She worked at Northview Wellness. 15 years. You called it restructuring, but it destroyed her. She lost her insurance, her savings. She got sick and never recovered. Do you even remember her?" He blinked slowly, as if the memory were trying to surface through years of denial. "I remember signing the documents," he said quietly. "But not names. There were hundreds. Hundreds," she repeated. The bitterness sharp. "That's all they were to you. Names on paper." "Ava," he said, stepping closer. "It wasn't personal. The company was under pressure." "Not personal," she snapped, her voice echoing through the marble lobby. "It's personal to me. You saved me that night. You helped me rebuild my life. And all this time the reason my mother suffered was because of you." His jaw tightened, pain flashing in his eyes. "I didn't know," he said. "If I had, you had," she interrupted. "You just didn't care." "That's not true," he said, his voice low. "I care now." "Because you feel guilty," she said. "You saved me because you couldn't save them." He flinched, the truth hitting like a blade. "You're right," he said, after a moment, his tone stripped of defense. "Maybe I was trying to atone for what I didn't see then. But that doesn't make what I feel for you less real." "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't talk about feelings. You don't get to rewrite what happened." He exhaled, looking down at the paper still in his hand. The rain started outside, soft at first, then heavier, slapping against the windows. "You said once that compassion was a choice," she whispered. but you only chose it when it was convenient. You're wrong, he said quietly. I chose it the night I stopped for you, and I've been choosing it every day since. She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. Then stop choosing me. You've done enough damage. She turned to leave, but he caught her wrist gently, desperately. Ava, please. She pulled free. You built an empire on decisions that broke people like my mother, and now you want me to believe you've changed. That one act of mercy erased the rest. No, he said, voice rough. It didn't erase anything, but it made me want to make things right. Then start by letting me go, she said, her voice trembling but steady. He stood still, rain-soaked light flickering across his face through the glass. If that's what you need, he said finally, I will. She walked away without looking back. The elevator doors closed between them with a metallic sigh that sounded like finality. Outside, the storm broke open, drenching her as she stepped into the street, but she didn't care. The water blurred everything, the city, the pain, the memories, until all that remained was motion. That night, Liam sat in his dark apartment, staring at the contract on his desk, the paper she had given him, still damp from her hands. He read the name again, Evelyn Thompson. He remembered the day he had signed that stack of documents, his assistant reminding him it would increase profit margins by 6%. He had nodded, distracted, already thinking of the next quarter. Now each letter of her mother's name cut deeper than any scandal had. He picked up his phone, dialing his old executive team, demanding records restitution, anything that could undo what had been done. But nothing could rewrite the years her mother had lost. He leaned back in his chair, the rain hammering the windows, guilt crashing in rhythm with it. For the first time he saw himself clearly, not as the savior or the victim, but as both the wound and the hand that caused it. Across the city, Ava sat by her window, clutching her mother's old photograph, tears mixing with the storm. She wanted to hate him, and part of her did. Yet another part remembered the way he had knelt in the rain, the night they met, the steadiness in his voice when he told her she was safe. That contradiction hollowed her out, until she felt nothing at all. Outside, lightning flickered across the sky, illuminating the city in sharp fragments. Somewhere in that vast glow, two people who had found each other through mercy now stood on opposite sides of the same truth, one shattered by betrayal, the other drowning in it. Weeks passed, and silence grew between them, like fog rolling over the bay, dense, heavy, and impossible to see through. Ava returned to her routines at the Art and Mind Center, but everything felt muted, like color drained from a painting left too long in the sun. She no longer looked for his name on her phone, no longer paused when she heard the soft chime of the door opening. Yet every evening her eyes drifted toward the skyline where his office tower once glowed. Liam Hart had vanished from public life. The news had long since moved on. The story of the billionaire who stepped down, fading into the background of newer scandals. But the space he left behind remained. The Art and Mind program continued without his presence, now funded through anonymous donations that Ava refused to believe weren't from him. She worked tirelessly, arriving early and leaving late, pouring her grief into each canvas she helped the patients create. Her own painting, a swirl of dark blue and copper, titled Reconstruction, hung unfinished in the corner. The image of a cracked heart mended with gold leaf. Some nights she stared at it and thought about how people talk about healing like it's a choice, when sometimes it's just survival disguised as patience. Then one afternoon, as she was cleaning brushes, a producer from a local television station arrived at the center asking for her. He introduced himself with a smile that felt practiced. "We're doing a feature on community art initiatives," he said. "We'd love to interview you about your story." Ava hesitated. "My story, yes," he said. "The way art helped you overcome hardship. You're the woman from the Hartwell article, right?" Her stomach turned, but she nodded slowly. "I am." "Perfect," he said, handing her a card. "We'd like to film you during one of the classes. It's about inspiration, not scandal, I promise." Against her better judgment, she agreed. When the segment aired a week later, she expected a small local piece, but it went viral within hours. The clip showed her speaking to a group of children, her voice soft but strong, as she said the man everyone called heartless once stopped in the rain and chose kindness over convenience. The internet latched onto the quote. Comment sections filled with praise and debate. Some called her naive, others called her brave, but most were simply moved. The line became a headline again, a new twist on an old story. The heartless genius wasn't heartless after all. Reporters camped outside her apartment again, not with mockery this time, but fascination. The foundation received donations from across the country, all dedicated to supporting victims of corporate downsizing. Ava's words had rekindled something she hadn't meant to spark a conversation about empathy and leadership, about accountability and change. Yet she refused to take interviews, giving only one statement through the foundation. This was never about one man's mistakes. It's about how we can all do better when we stop pretending to be perfect. Across town, Liam saw the video from a hospital room where he had been volunteering quietly under an alias. He watched her speak on a small television, mounted in the corner, her eyes clear and her tone steady, and something inside him loosened. It wasn't pride or relief, it was forgiveness he hadn't earned, but somehow been given. That night he walked along the pier overlooking Puget Sound, the water black and silver beneath the moonlight. The wind carried the echo of her voice. He closed his eyes and whispered, "You were right." The next morning he drafted an anonymous donation to expand the foundation's reach nationally. He added a single note, "Let her never stop creating." Ava suspected it was him the moment she read the letterhead with no name. For the first time since the confrontation, she didn't feel anger, only a strange, quiet gratitude. Months slipped into a rhythm of soft transformation. The Art and Mind program grew, drawing therapists, volunteers, and artists from all over. Ava's leadership became its soul. Yet beneath the success, she felt the absence of something. She couldn't replace the way he had seen her without agenda, the calm in his voice that could still silence the noise in her head. One evening, she returned to her apartment to find a plain envelope under her door. Inside was a small photograph, the mural they had painted together, at the center taken from the opposite side of the street. On the back, a single line in his handwriting read, "You gave it light." She stared at it until the edges blurred. She didn't know where he was, or if he expected a response, but the gesture was enough. It told her he was still watching from a distance, still believing in the work they'd begun. Weeks later, an invitation arrived from a national arts organization inviting her to speak at a conference in New York. They wanted her to discuss the role of empathy in modern art. The irony wasn't lost on her. she who had learned empathy from the man who had once forgotten it. On the night of the event, as she stood backstage, she felt the familiar tremor of nerves, but also a steadiness she hadn't known before. When she stepped onto the stage, the lights were blinding the crowd, a blur of faces. She began with a story she had told no one. "There was a time I believed kindness was weakness," she said. "That helping someone meant losing a part of yourself. But one night in the rain, a stranger proved me wrong. He showed me that strength isn't about control, it's about compassion, even when it costs you everything." The audience was silent for a long moment before the applause began soft. At first, then swelling. Afterward, as people came to thank her, she felt a strange calm settle over her, a peace that had been a long time coming. When she returned to Seattle, she stood at the same corner where she had once fallen, the same grate where her heel had caught. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement just as they had that night, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She knelt touching the cold metal and whispered, "Thank you not to him, but to the moment itself, the accident that had broken her open to something larger." Somewhere miles away, Liam read the transcript of her speech on a news site and smiled faintly. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to fix anything. She had already done that by telling the world the truth he hadn't known how to say. He closed the laptop, the faint sound of rain against the window filling the silence. The city once his cage now sounded almost like forgiveness. As Ava walked home that night, her reflection rippling in puddles, she realized that some stories don't end when people part. They keep unfolding quietly in the lives they touch, in the strangers who hear them and decide to do better. And though she didn't know it across the city, Liam looked up at the same sky, whispering her name into the rain, not as a plea, but as a prayer of thanks, for the woman who had taught him that falling wasn't failure, it was how you learned to stand again. The city had changed by the time spring arrived. Seattle's skyline shimmered under a softer sun, and for the first time in months, the streets smelled of blooming dogwood instead of rain. Ava's days at the Art and Mind Foundation followed a quiet rhythm, now full but no longer frantic. The scandal was history. The pain had dulled into something gentler, and yet sometimes when she stood by the windows of the center overlooking Lake Union, she still thought about him. She had convinced herself that what happened between them belonged to another lifetime, but traces of him lived everywhere, the way the staff used his phrases in meetings, the way the mission statement he'd written still hung framed on the wall. Empathy first, profit second. She hadn't seen or heard from Liam Hart in almost a year, not since the envelope with the photograph. Until one morning a letter arrived. It bore no return address, only her name in that unmistakably steady handwriting. Inside was a single page. "There's something you should see. Noon tomorrow. The address is below." The location was an old industrial building near the waterfront one that had been empty for years. Her pulse quickened as she read it again, debating whether to go. Curiosity won. When she arrived the next day, the wide steel doors were open, sunlight streaming across the polished concrete floor. Inside the space had been transformed soft lights, art displays, accessibility ramps, and clusters of tables covered with brushes, prosthetics, and sketches. A banner hung across the back wall, Haven Foundation, rebuilding through compassion, and standing beneath it was Liam. He turned as she entered, his expression a mixture of nerves and quiet hope. He looked different, simpler somehow. His hair a little longer, his clothes less tailored, his presence lighter. "You came," he said. "I wasn't sure you would. You didn't exactly give me details," she replied. "What is this, a new beginning?" he said. "The Haven Foundation. We provide rehabilitation and art therapy for survivors of trauma and for children with physical disabilities. It's what Hartwell Dynamics should have been from the start." She looked around, recognizing equipment built from his old company's designs, prosthetic limbs shaped with artistic patterns, mobility aids that looked like sculptures instead of machines. "You're funding all this." "With what's left of my shares and a few partners who still believe in people more than image," he said. "But it's not just mine. It's ours if you'll take it." Her breath caught. "Ours, I want you to be Haven's Director of Arts and Community," he said. "You've already been doing the work, Ava. This just gives you the space to do it bigger." She stared at him, torn between disbelief and emotion. "After everything that happened, why me?" "Because you remind me what compassion looks like when it's hard," he said. "Because this place only makes sense if you're part of it." She looked away, blinking against the sting of tears. "You don't need to make this up to me, Liam. This isn't atonement," he said quietly. "It's continuation. You were the spark that made me see what had to change." He gestured toward a far corner of the room. "Come here, there's someone I want you to meet." A little girl sat at a table, painting with a prosthetic arm. The device was sleek, its design elegant but practical. She turned when they approached, smiling shyly. "Ava, this is Mia," Liam said. "She lost her arm in an accident 2 years ago. She's one of our first participants." "Hi, Mia," Ava said softly. "That's a beautiful painting." The girl grinned. "Mr. Hart said you'd like it. He said you teach people how to make feelings look like colors." Ava looked at Liam, her chest tightening. "He said that, did he? He says lots of nice things," Mia replied, giggling. Ava knelt beside her. "He's not always wrong." As she guided the girl through mixing colors, Liam watched from a few steps away. His expression unguarded for once. The sunlight caught the side of his face, and for the first time since the night of their fight, Ava saw him not as the man who had broken something, but as the man trying to rebuild it, piece by piece. When the session ended, she stood beside him, her voice soft. "You really did change everything." He smiled faintly. "You started it. You gave it a place to grow," she said. They walked together through the wide hall, the echoes of laughter following them. "You know," he said after a moment, "when I first imagined Haven, I thought it would be about redemption. But now I think it's about belonging. For everyone who thought they didn't deserve a second chance. Including you, especially me," he admitted. "And you." "Maybe," she said. "I used to think healing meant forgetting. Now I think it's just remembering without pain." "That's progress," he said. "That's living," she corrected. They stopped by a window overlooking the harbor. The water glittered in the afternoon light. A ferry passed in the distance, its horn a low hum against the wind. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the brightness outside. "So what happens now?" "Now," he said, "we keep building, slowly, honestly." He hesitated, then added, "And maybe we start forgiving ourselves too." She smiled, the kind that comes only after a long storm. "I think we already did." For a moment, neither spoke. Then, without planning it, he reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It was a small gesture, tentative and sincere, the kind that said more than words could carry. She didn't pull away. The quiet between them felt whole again, not empty but full of understanding. "I missed this," he said. "The quiet, the possibility," he said, "of something good, not ruined by the past." "Then maybe stop looking backward," she said softly. "You might miss what's right in front of you." His gaze lingered on her. "I see it," he said simply. As she walked away to help another volunteer, he stayed where he was watching her move through the light, like a piece of art come alive. The girl who once trembled in the rain had become the steady force holding others together. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Ava returned to the mural they had started on the back wall. She picked up a brush and added a final stroke, a burst of gold over the waves where light met shadow. Liam joined her silently, standing beside her, the two of them looking at the completed image. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's honest," she replied. He smiled. "That's better." Outside, the last light of day melted into the water, painting everything in shades of gold and blue. For the first time, there was no rain, no fear, no distance. Only two people standing in the same light, finally learning that change isn't a single moment of transformation, but a slow, relentless choosing of compassion again and again, until it becomes who you are. The invitation arrived in early autumn, printed on thick ivory paper with the seal of the Global Health and Technology Summit. Pressed in gold across the top, Liam read it twice, his expression unreadable as he stood by the window of the Haven Foundation office. The letter was formal, the tone almost ceremonial. "We would be honored if Mr. Liam Hart would deliver the keynote address on the subject of humanity in innovation." For years, this was the kind of stage that had defined his life, but now the thought of standing under those lights again made his chest tighten. He looked across the room to where Ava was working with a group of volunteers, her laughter mingling with the rustle of brushes and paper. When she noticed his gaze, she walked over. "What's that?" she asked, nodding toward the letter. "An invitation," he said. "The summit in San Francisco. They want me to speak." "You're going," she said immediately. "You should. You think anyone still wants to hear what I have to say?" "I think they need to," she replied. "The old version of you built machines to predict emotion. The new version actually feels it. That's the man they should hear." He looked at her, his smile small but real. "Will you come?" "Someone has to make sure you don't turn it into a lecture on algorithms," she said. So yes. 2 weeks later, they boarded a flight together, the city shrinking beneath the clouds as they left. The conference hall was vast, filled with industry leaders, scientists, and philanthropists from around the world. As Liam walked to the stage, the applause was hesitant. At first, the audience unsure of what to expect from the man who had once been both genius and scandal. He adjusted the microphone, scanning the crowd until his gaze found Ava, seated in the front row. Her nod was subtle, steadying. He began. 2 years ago, I stood in a boardroom filled with numbers. Those numbers told me which decisions would make us rich, efficient, unstoppable. I believed them because they didn't cry, they didn't question, they didn't remind me of what it meant to be human. Then one night, I drove through a storm and saw a woman in an alley who could not walk, who looked at me with more fear than I'd ever seen in my life. And for the first time, I realized that all my success meant nothing if I couldn't choose compassion when it was inconvenient. The room was silent. Cameras clicked, but no one interrupted. He continued, voice lower now. I built systems that claimed to understand emotion, But I forgot that empathy isn't data, it's presence. You can't measure humanity by metrics. You can only practice it. Every day, especially when it costs you something." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "I lost my company, my reputation, and nearly myself. But in losing those things, I found a better purpose. I learned that progress without compassion isn't progress. It's just power pretending to be good." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. He looked down for a moment, then back up, his tone softening. "Sometimes it takes a stranger to make us human again." His eyes met Ava's then, and though the audience didn't know the story, the truth between them filled the air. The applause began slowly, a few people standing, then more, until the entire hall rose to its feet. When he stepped off stage, reporters surged forward, but he moved past them, heading straight toward her. "You did it," she said, her eyes bright. "No," he replied. "We did." The following days were a blur of headlines. The redemption of Liam Hart, from heartless to human, the billionaire who chose empathy. But for once, the stories didn't make him flinch. They weren't about power or scandal, but about change, about the quiet revolution that had begun when one man stopped for a stranger in the rain. Back in Seattle, the Haven Foundation received record donations enough to expand nationwide. Ava threw herself into the work with renewed passion, and Liam spent more time with the patients, talking, listening, learning. Their partnership had deepened into something unspoken but constant, a bond built on trust, tested by pain and held together by choice. One evening, as the sun set over the Sound, they stood together on the balcony outside the main hall. Below them, the courtyard buzzed with volunteers preparing for the Foundation's anniversary event. Lanterns swayed in the wind, their light soft and golden. "You ever think about how far we've come?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "And it still feels like the beginning." She turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "That speech," she said, "it wasn't just about the company, was it?" "No," he admitted, "it was about us, about forgiveness, about what you taught me." "I didn't teach you," she said. "You just finally listened." He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "Then I hope I never stop listening." For a while they said nothing, letting the wind carry the faint hum of laughter from below. Ava's gaze drifted toward the mural they had painted together on the far wall, a wave breaking into light. "You know," she said softly, "you used to think you had to fix everything. Now you just help it grow. That's a better kind of power. And you," he said, "used to think you were small. Now the whole world's listening to your voice." She looked up at him, and the golden reflection of the lanterns danced in her eyes. "Maybe we both stopped pretending we were who the world said we were. Maybe we just became who we were meant to be," he said. The first raindrop fell between them, then faint and hesitant, followed by another. She laughed quietly. "Seattle never changes." "No," he said, "but we did." The rain grew steadier, soft but insistent, and neither moved. It wasn't like the storm that had once thrown their lives together. It was gentler now, cleansing rather than cruel. Around them, the lights shimmered through the drizzle, turning everything gold and silver. "You know what I realized," she said. "What?" "That sometimes redemption isn't about being forgiven. It's about what you do after the world stops watching." "Then we'll keep doing it," he said, "even when no one's looking." She smiled, the corners of her mouth trembling, especially then. As the evening deepened, the courtyard lights flickered on, illuminating the Foundation's sign, "Haven, a place for healing." The people below laughed and worked and painted, living proof of what compassion could build when given the chance. Liam reached for her hand, not in possession or apology, but in peace. She didn't hesitate this time. Their fingers intertwined steady and sure. The rain fell around them, but neither sought shelter. There was nothing left to hide from. In that quiet moment, with the world humming beneath them and the sky breaking open above, Liam understood the final truth he had been chasing all along. That redemption was not a single act or a grand speech, but the choice to love without fear, to care without expectation, and to keep showing up even after you've fallen. He turned to her, his voice barely above the rain. "Thank you," he said, "for saving me." She shook her head, her eyes glistening. "No," she whispered, "you saved yourself. I just reminded you it was possible." The lights reflected in the wet pavement below, rippling like stars scattered across the ground. And in that shimmering reflection, their story no longer looked like tragedy or miracle. It looked like life fragile and unfinished, but endlessly capable of beginning again. 2 years later, the city had learned to breathe again. The glass towers of Seattle still caught the same restless rain. The ferries still crossed the Sound with their steady hum. But for Ava and Liam, the rhythm of life had slowed into something quieter, truer. The Haven Foundation had grown beyond what either of them imagined branches in other cities' partnerships, with schools and hospitals, and a waiting list of artists and patients eager to join. Yet in the evenings when the work was done, Ava still came to the same studio, by the window overlooking the water, where light moved like liquid gold across the floorboards. She stood before her latest canvas brush, hovering just above the surface, the scent of turpentine and sea air filling the room. Outside, the sunset melted into the horizon, the Sound shimmering in hues of rose and copper. She had been painting this same scene for weeks, waves meeting light movement, meeting stillness, and every time she thought it was finished, something called her back. Behind her, a familiar voice said, "You're still chasing the perfect dawn." She turned, smiling. Liam stood in the doorway, jacket slung over one arm, the faint lines of time around his eyes softened by peace rather than stress. "I'm not chasing," she said. "I'm just trying to catch what it feels like." "And what does it feel like?" he asked, walking closer. She thought for a moment. "Like forgiveness," she said. He nodded his gaze, drifting to the painting. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "It's honest," she corrected the same words she'd told him once. He laughed quietly. "You never let me forget. Someone has to keep you humble." "I think life already did that," he said, smiling. They stood side by side, watching the light fade. Below, the faint laughter of children echoed from the courtyard, the evening art class she had started for local families. She could see their small silhouettes through the glass, little hands waving brushes, laughter spilling into the dusk. "You built this," he said softly. "No," she replied. "We did. You gave me the space. I just filled it with color, and somehow," he said, "you filled everything else too." She looked at him, then really looked. The man who had once lived behind walls of logic and wealth now stood beside her unguarded. "You ever think about that night?" she asked. "The alley, the rain. Every time it storms," he said, "it doesn't haunt me anymore. It reminds me of what that mercy is, a beginning, not an ending." She smiled faintly. "I used to think that moment broke me. Now I think it was the world breaking open, letting light in." The room fell quiet, the kind of silence that holds warmth instead of emptiness. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper slightly worn. "I found this when I was cleaning out my desk," he said, handing it to her. It was the note he'd written the night they met. "You are safe now. Rest. L." She ran her thumb over the faded ink, her chest tightening. "You kept it. I kept everything he said. Because that night changed everything." She looked up, eyes shining. "It changed me too." He stepped closer, his voice soft. "No rain tonight." "Not anymore," she whispered. He reached for her hand, then slow and certain, and she let him. Their fingers intertwined, familiar, now steady. The sunset outside deepened the sound, catching its reflection, until water and sky were the same shade of gold. They stood in that light saying nothing, because words would have less truth than silence. In the distance, the fairy horn sounded, long and low, a reminder that even endings keep moving. Liam leaned closer, his voice barely above a breath. "You ever wonder why we met?" She smiled. "Because you took a wrong turn in the rain." "Because fate was tired of waiting," he said. And maybe she replied, "Because we both needed saving." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "You still paint like the world's watching," he teased. "Maybe it is," she said, "but I don't mind anymore." "What changed? I stopped painting for them," she said. "I started painting for me." He nodded slowly. "That's how I feel about living." The last of the sunlight slipped away, leaving only the quiet glow of lamps and the faint shimmer of the city reflected in the water. Ava turned back to her canvas, dipped her brush in white, and drew one final stroke across the horizon, a line of light cutting through the dark. She stepped back, tilting her head. "There," she said. "Finished." He studied it, then her. "You sure for tonight?" she said. "Tomorrow, who knows?" He smiled. "That's what I love about you." "My uncertainty." "Your courage," he said. "The way you walk into every new beginning, like it's a promise instead of a risk." She laughed softly. Says the man who rebuilt his empire on compassion. "It's not an empire," he said. "It's a home." She turned to face him fully, her expression tender. "Then let's go home." They walked through the quiet halls of the foundation, past walls covered with art, some childish, some profound, all full of life. Each piece told a story of survival, of people who had learned like them that healing isn't a destination, but a daily act. Outside, the evening breeze carried the scent of salt and rain as they stepped into the courtyard. Lanterns glowed under the trees, and the surface of the Sound mirrored the moonlight. Ava paused, looking out at the water. "Do you ever think about how everything began with one choice?" she asked. "You mean the night I stopped the car?" "Yes," she said, "one choice to care. It's strange, isn't it? How a single moment can change the whole shape of your life." "Not strange," he said, "just miraculous." She squeezed his hand, the warmth of it, grounding her in a way words never could. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain, but no storm followed. For once, Seattle stayed calm. He looked at her and smiled. "Please," she said playfully, echoing her own words from that first night, "don't leave." His eyes softened. "I'm right here." They stayed that way, standing together by the water as the city behind them glowed and quieted. In the reflection of the Sound, two silhouettes leaned closer until the distance between them disappeared. Above them, the clouds parted, revealing the first clear stars of the night. The narrator's voice, gentle as the tide, seemed to echo from the light itself. "Sometimes the ones we save end up saving us, and love at its purest is not the grand gesture or the perfect ending, it is the choice to stay, again and again, even after the storm. The camera of life pulled back slowly, the frame widening to capture the city, the sound and the soft glow of the foundation's light stretching like hope across the water. And there in that glow, two figures stood, facing the horizon, no longer defined by fear or failure, but by what they had built together, something human, fragile, and everlasting. Before you go, take a moment to breathe in this story and let it sit with you, the quiet truth that sometimes healing doesn't come from being rescued, but from choosing to stay when life feels too heavy to hold alone. If Liam and Ava's journey reminded you of the power of compassion, of the way one small act of kindness can ripple through a lifetime, then maybe this story found you at the right time. We live in a world that celebrates power, speed, and success, but forgets that the gentlest thing, stopping for a stranger in the rain, can change everything. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that love is not weakness, that redemption is not impossible, and that no matter how far you've fallen, there is always light waiting at the edge of the storm. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight and how this story made you feel. Did it bring back a memory, a person, or a moment when you too were saved by someone's unexpected kindness? We'd love to hear your voice, because stories like these don't just belong to the people in them. They belong to everyone who still believes that empathy matters. And if you believe, truly believe, that love can rebuild what pain once tore apart, click like, subscribe, and help us spread these stories of hope to the world. Your support allows us to keep telling tales that remind people everywhere that every soul, no matter how broken, deserves a second chance. Let this be more than just another story that ends when the video fades. Let it be a beginning, a promise that you will carry this light forward in your own way. Reach out to someone tonight. Call a friend you haven't spoken to in a while. Smile at a stranger. Forgive yourself for the things you thought made you unworthy of love. Because in the end, every act of compassion writes a new story, and the world could use a few more of them. Thank you for watching, for feeling, for remembering that kindness is still the most powerful thing we have. Until the next story, hold on to that light. It's yours now.